You're listening to the Holistic Nootropics Podcast, your home for holistic, evidence-based cognitive enhancement strategies. And now your host, Eric Levi.
Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Holistic Nootropics Podcast, where we discuss using nootropics, biohacking, and nutrition to help you boost your cognition. My name is Eric, and today we have Shawn Wells. Shawn is the world's leading nutritional biochemist and expert on health optimization. He has formulated over 500 supplements, food, beverages, and cosmeceuticals, and patented 10 novel ingredients, including teacrine, dynamine, and dihydroberberine, and is now known as the Ingredientologist, the scientist of ingredients. And those are some awesome nootropics, which we'll get into in this podcast. As a world-renowned thought leader on mitochondrial health, his insights have been prominently featured in documentaries and top health podcasts, while also being regularly invited to speak at major events around the world. His book, The Energy Formula, has been recognized by both USA Today and Forbes, as well as an Amazon bestseller in multiple categories. So, Shawn, welcome to the Holistic Nootropics Podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Eric. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. And I'm excited to chat with you about just all this health nerdy stuff that I love and we talk about a lot on this podcast. But before we jump into the podcast, just want to mention that Shawn is actually a featured speaker this year at the Biohacking Congress taking place in Miami, Florida, October 16th and 17th. This is a big deal because this is really the first big biohacking / health and wellness conference that has happened in almost 2 years. So it's going to be definitely an event you don't want to miss. Now, it's pretty cool because here at the Holistic Nootropics Podcast, we have teamed up with the good folks over at the Biohacking Congress, and they have given us a special deal on in-person tickets. I believe it's either $50 off or 50% off tickets. I have to double check that. And if you want those tickets, all you got to do is email me, info@holisticnootropics.com. They've also given me a number of free tickets to attend the conference virtually. So you can watch the entire conference and watch amazing speakers like our guest Shawn today from the comfort of your own home. If you want one of those free virtual tickets, just go on over to Apple Podcasts, and all you got to do is leave a 5-star review of the Holistic Nootropics Podcast. Take a screenshot of that, email it over to me over at info@holisticnootropics.com, and I will shoot you over a free virtual ticket to the Biohacking Congress. Pretty sweet deal, I think, for all the good folks who want to learn from people like yourself, Mr. Wells.
But don't do it virtually. Come to the conference. Miami, come on now.
Oh my God. Miami right now is just popping. You got to get there.
For sure. It'll be a good time. We'll all hang out. We'll go have drinks in Miami.
We'll all hang out. We won't talk about vaccinations at all.
No.
We won't mention anything.
No.
Well, cool. Shawn, you are in another one of these states that's wide open, Texas, and you haven't always been there. And your journey to get to where you are now is very interesting. So maybe before we jump into all of the cool topics we're going to talk about today, maybe you could talk a little bit about how you became this ingredientologist and one of the world leaders at supplement formulations and thought leaders in this wellness and biohacking space.
Yeah, biochemistry has always interested in me. I had dreams of being a formulator, like back to being a child, really. Like when my mom was like, she'd have like this tackle box of all the different supplements, and she sold this company Shackley that was from Europe. Like it had a whole food multivitamin and a big vitamin C and vitamin E and all these different things in the tackle box. And that was one of the things that really started me down that path of thinking of the power of supplements to heal and be therapeutic, especially these orthomolecular doses. And so I ended up getting my master's at UNC Chapel Hill in nutritional biochemistry, becoming a registered dietitian and working for about 10 years clinically as a chief clinical dietitian in acute and long-term care. That really gave me like a patient-centered focus, especially when it came to healing different disease states, working with pressure ulcers, urinary tract infections, burn patients, cancer patients, cachexia, all kinds of things that were, pretty serious conditions, and that got to challenge my brain and work with a cross-functional team clinically, but, all the while on my nights, weekends, and vacations, I was, working on message boards, working with athletes, working with these companies to, write their marketing pieces, working on small formulations, rarely ever getting paid. Sometimes I'd get some free supplements or something like that. And then I'd be going to these trade shows, things like the Arnold and the Olympia, and setting up booths, and just kept going and growing from there. But I was literally working about 80 hours a week. I was working probably 50, 60 hours a week as a dietitian, and, running kitchens, running, the clinical side as well, like on the halls. But then, also like in all my free time, I'd be just chasing this dream of being a formulator. And I eventually got on with Dymatize full-time, a sports nutrition company. They're number 2 in the world at making protein behind Optimum Nutrition, who had been acquired by Glanbia. And the goal was to get Dymatize acquired. And we did in 3 years to Post Foods. But, Dymatize was in 70 countries, hundreds of products. And it was just a massive company. And I got to be their director of R&D, train under my mentor, Dr. Rob Wildman, who is incredibly accomplished, just academic research and media savvy and all that really just taught me the ropes. And then I got on with BioTrust, working with Josh and Joel, we went from 0 to 150 million a year direct to consumer in about 2 years. It's a really a hell of a story. We had amazing products. They still do. I'm now, doing my own thing with my company's own Halo formulations, where I formulate for companies. And then I also have a company that I have partners with called Ingenious Ingredients, where we patent novel ingredients. One partner owns a 400,000 square foot facility in China, over 100 scientists, GMP facility. We've created about 20 ingredients together. My 2 other partners are organic chemists that are good with intellectual property filing, study design. So that's like what I do, what makes me money. But I've enjoyed also just educating people. And those are things that don't make me money, probably cost me money, is like all my social media, the book, like just getting on stages, presenting at conferences, doing podcasts, doing radio shows, etc., being on TV, doing documentaries. Like it's all just stuff that I enjoy, putting information out there, educating people. So I guess that's what I do. That's who I am. And like you said, I've actually patented about 15 ingredients now. And I've done more than 500 products. I've done quite a bit of work in the industry, and I've been doing this for about 20 years now.
And that's an amazing journey. And you've definitely done, so much, contributed so much to the supplement industry. And, you were saying a lot of what you do is the non-paid information stuff. And man, like being in the space, I can tell you, we need more educated voices because there's just so much noise. And even in the literature, even when you start trying to research a compound or, a formula, there just seems like there's not consistent information out there.
Oh, 100%. And that's what drives me crazy. That's what hurts me. Like when people are like, oh, supplements don't work. It's like, well, what supplement are you taking? Like, what is it you're using and doing? And, that's my first question, because there's probably about 80% of the supplements out there are not good. And so that does frustrate me, and that people are going to have experiences with supplements and have negative ones, or even get sick, which really, really bothers me, especially coming from my clinical background. So that is what I'm trying to do, is explain what a good supplement is, tell them the ingredients that are efficacious, and hopefully they can have a good experience and get healthier in the process.
It's so crucial, like what you're saying there. Actually, what we have on our website on the homepage is we have a supplement buyer's guide, which is basically, just a guide of ingredients to look out for in supplements. Because, man, like people will look at the nutrition facts label, and this goes for food, this goes for all this stuff, and they'll look at, how much fat does it have, how much proteins does it have, how much carbohydrates, how many calories. And then they miss that whole bottom part that says other ingredients. And in my opinion, that's the most important part of, in our case, the supplements, because, you think you're buying like a vitamin C formula or like a glutathione formula or something. And then you don't realize all the stuff that's encapsulated in it, all the flow agents, all the fillers, all the preservatives. I mean, I see canola oil in these supplements. And then you realize like this was probably sitting on a hot truck somewhere. So now you've completely denatured, whatever oils are in there, whatever filler agents, and people just completely take that for granted.
No, that's a phenomenal point. I love that. And I agree to be mindful of all of it going in you. And then, and what's the bottle that it's in? And like, how is it, what's the cap like? Is there cotton in it? Is there desiccant in it? Like, are those kind of things done? And to your point, like it costs extra money in terms of how it's shipped. Like when I was with BioTrust, like our products would be shipped on what's called a reefer truck, like a refrigerated truck if it was during the summer. And then we had a climate controlled facility where these products were stored and then fulfilled. So, those kinds of things are important, especially if you care about shelf life. And these products by law are supposed to test out for what is on the label at the end of the shelf life. So that means 2 years later, after it's been manufactured, it's supposed to still test out to that level. So that's why we took the time and concern to, make sure that it's one, there's like overages, because we've done what's called stability work and accelerated stability work to see how these products age under heat, under moisture. And then we put in overages of certain ingredients that tend to degrade over time so that it will test out. And we know how these ingredients interact with each other. Sometimes there's chemical to chemical interactions. And then, we're taking concern in how it gets stored, how it gets transported, and then what it actually is in the bottle with. Again, like these desiccants, and things like that. So having bottles that won't let light in, et cetera. So those are all important steps so that these products work for the life of the product.
And what you said too is like these chemicals, they have certain effects with each other. So like a lot of times you'll study a product and you're like, whatever it is, vitamin D or B vitamins or whatever. And you'll do the research and go, oh, vitamin D is good. Okay, so get some vitamin D. Riboflavin, thiamine, those are good. So I'll get some of that. But then you get these like multivitamins, or you get these like liver products or prostate products, or name your product with X amount of compounds in there. These compounds probably have like a synergistic effect with each other, where maybe they don't cancel each other out, but one might enhance one might cancel something out. So I feel like that's kind of a common thing you see so much. And in America, especially, we have that notion that, well, if something's good, more is better. So we just start piling on stuff. And it's interesting because lately I've just been hearing so much people turning their backs on things like multivitamins, people really shunning the multivitamin world.
I developed a few multivitamins, and I spent anywhere from like 1 to 2 years doing the studies, blending studies, looking at the input levels, looking at the forms, trying to get the right standardization of all these ingredients. And it is super, like just having a product with like 5 ingredients is hard. But when you have like 20, 30 ingredients and they have to all be at these certain levels for the life of the product, and, these ingredients interact with each other in certain ways, like, we'd have to look at like, okay, we're going to blend these so many ingredients, and then we have to, let the blender go for a little bit, and then we can add some more. And then we have to, add like some kind of drying agent, and then let the blender go more, and then add these ingredients. Like we were doing studies on just how we blend it. is you can actually create like hot spots, what's called, like where you have like too much of one ingredient and too little of another in certain parts of the blend. Like, and there's a lot of work that goes into it. Literally spend years on a multi. It's not easy. Anyone who just says they're going to put out a multi and puts out one in months, it's like they're not doing the work. It's super hard. But I agree with you. Like, one of the things that I mentioned on my Instagram just recently on like buying, like, how to buy a good supplement. One of the things I lean towards is, maybe like 3 to 6 ingredients. Like, and, I think less is more. I don't like proprietary blends. I don't like a kitchen sink of ingredients. A multi is kind of like an exception. And again, you can argue whether you should take one or not, but I like for the ingredients to have complementary mechanisms of action. So, a lot of these products, let's say they're some blood sugar product or whatever, and they'll have 12 ingredients that have all been shown to impact blood sugar. Well, why are all 12 of those there? Mm-hmm. We should know what each mechanism of action is that we want to impact, pick the best ingredient for that mechanism of action, and then put those ingredients together so they have synergy. And it's probably not going to be 12 ingredients unless you have 12 mechanisms of action. So it's literally just marketing fluff to have all those ingredients in there at probably the wrong doses. Or if they were all the effective doses, you're kind of overdosing. So, it's either way, it doesn't make sense. Like, what does make sense is using the effective dose per the studies and then having something else go a different mechanism of action that could be potentially in there as well.
Yeah. I'm totally in line with what you're saying. And coming from the nootropic space, there's some nootropics products out there that I'm not going to name them, but one in particular, I mean, they really do throw the kitchen sink, and you have to take a lot of it. And I hear mixed results. Some people love products like that. There's a couple products out there that I think are okay that have far less ingredients in them, but it's kind of the same thing. Like, how much choline and different forms of choline can you stuff in your brain? Like the choline product itself, and then the acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, and then you top it off with
that can get dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean, same with serotonin, same with dopamine, like things like that. Like, you don't want to have too much acetylcholine or, there definitely can be too much, and you can be overstimulated. And like, for example, with serotonin, like it's called serotonin syndrome or serotonin 6 syndrome clinically. Like, when you have like arrhythmia, tachycardia, you're overstimulated, you're panicked. There's diaphoresis, like where you kind of feel hot and cold, and like it can be traumatic to have serotonin syndrome. And it's it's the same with a number of these other neurotransmitters. You don't want to like go too much, and that's where like acetylcholine esterase inhibitors, like Cuprazine A, like that can be good to use here and there, or things like that are SSRIs, like Zembrin, like from Kana, things like that. Like, it can be good from time to time. Like, maybe if you have like some, big exam or, big event or whatever it is, like, then it's cool. But like, chronically using these things is probably not ideal. Unless you're like someone that has like a neurodegenerative condition and you're doing this with a doctor, et cetera, So yeah, agreed.
Yeah. I mean, people forget we're just like human chemistry labs, right? Like, and we all have like specific genes and SNPs and these things that we already have the blueprint set. And then you start throwing all these chemicals in there and you start messing with neurotransmitters, especially. I mean, things can go off the rails real quick. I see it all the time.
Well, and you bring up something, given your specialty and your background, of all the areas in supplements that I would say it makes the least amount of sense to have like a pre-prescribed stack, like kind of like I believe the product you're talking about, like it's it's not ideal. Like when I started doing this 20 plus years ago, like you get on Reddit boards or message boards, and everyone's stack was very different because everyone's brain chemistry is very different. Yes, we're all different across all of our systems, genetics, SNPs, all the things that you're mentioning, but not to the degree like neurochemistry wise. Like that's a whole different ballgame to me. Like where I see stacks are very different, and one thing that works for one person literally does not work for the next person. I've rarely seen someone's nootropic stack, like if it's pretty robust, work for someone else. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't. Like it's so different. So like that's where like these guys like say, you know, like, yes, like, well, let's start with like your, you know, choline base, you know, it could be like using CDP or alpha GPC or both or whatever. And then like, let's, you know, add something from there, like maybe some race tam or whatever. And then like keep kind of stacking up and going, you know, one thing at a time, but like just getting some pre-made stack, you know, sometimes that can be too much. I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible. It can work, but it just seems to me that typically you need to kind of work from the ground up with nootropics.
I think you're right. And that's actually partially why I started this whole channel and website, because I see all of this happening in the nootropic space and in the biohacking space. People will go on these boards, whether it's Reddit, Facebook, whatever it is. And, you know, people who are new to these groups, and I run some of these groups, so I see all these posts. They go, "Hey, what do you think of these? What do you think of my stack?" And I swear, you have to hit continue reading like 3 times because it just goes and goes. It's like, dude, are you spending $500 a week on supplement? Like, just do cocaine. I don't know what to tell you, man. Like, this is a bad habit. And at the end of the day, like they're not better. They're not, you know, they're not doing any like high level thinky stuff. Like I know people who are coders and who are working on these, you know, heavy duty brain intense crypto project. They're not taking any of that stuff. Right. So like, what are you doing in your life that you need all of that supplementation that's probably working against you? Right.
Exactly. And that, I mean, that's a great example. Like, for example, going back to choline and acetylcholine specifically, I mean, yes, that's often the foundation of these nootropic stacks because you will burn through acetylcholine. I mean, yeah, choline gets used like in brain lipids and things like that, but mainly we're talking about acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter. And yes, like when you're focused, when you're productive, like you're burning through it more. But the question is, to your point, you know, how neurologically active and productive are you day to day? And if you're someone that's, you know, a Navy SEAL, like maybe you need X amount, but like if you're someone that's just, you know, doing like day-to-day work, maybe you don't need that amount. And, you know, this can also vary, like, you know, what you might need during the weekday might be different than the weekend. And that's where kind of playing around with this stuff and understanding your neurochemistry can be super helpful.
And you probably know, as like a dietitian who's worked with people, that it's not the lack of supplements in a person's life that they're missing. It's probably more foundational health stuff, like, you know, their guts messed up, metabolism. You know, a lot of people have neurological issues from, I mean, trauma is a big one, but then like, you know, toxin exposure, chemical exposure, mold exposure. You know, I mentioned this a bunch of times on the podcast, but when I started doing this Great Plains organic acid urine analysis, and you could actually see like the things that are in people's urine, especially the environmental toxin panel, and you start seeing all of these different toxic chemicals coming out, and you ask the person, like in my case, I tested high for this chemical that's found in fireworks. And I'm living here in Puerto Rico, and around holiday time, people shoot off fireworks all night, every day. And yeah, I'm just surrounded by it. Or if you live by a gas station, you urinate that chemical out. Or there's like a chemical in gym, what is it? Like the rubber mats at gyms, you know? So a lot of times people just have these chemical burdens that do like affect their brain health or the gut or something like this. So I would imagine someone who's worked with people directly, you probably see a lot of foundational issues like that.
Oh, 100%, especially clinically, I would see a lot of that stuff. And you see it too late. I do like what you're talking about, just being so proactive and while you're healthy, starting to explore this stuff before it becomes degenerative, before it becomes pathological with your disease state, like getting it much earlier to realize like I have an elevated level of X and that could lead to disease state. Like that's so much better to be proactive on that end. That's where I love like the, functional medicine, integrative medicine, where it's at right now. I work with Dr. Daniel Stickler in Austin, and we work with peptides and we do brain mapping and, breath and heart mapping. And it's just super cool to really explore all this stuff, but, certainly look at SNPs and things like that and explore like what makes sense for me and what levels I am working on, so that the next time I check in with him and I do all these tests that I see like, okay, we've resolved that one. Let's move on to this thing. I do love that. I love the idea of being proactive with your health like that.
Absolutely. So you mentioned the P word, peptides, and this is an area that I really don't know much about. So can you maybe talk a little bit about peptides and why they're now becoming so popular and maybe even shine some light on a couple that you think are really exciting coming down the road here?
Yeah, I think the peptides, first off, are just amino acids at a certain length. A lot of these are anywhere from like 5 to 50 amino acids in length. Most of them have some biological activity and are signals that occur naturally. So most of the peptides that are being sold can't be patented. And that really creates a gray area, if you will, of like, these are not supplements. They're not patentable drugs. They occur naturally, but they're not supplements. So they end up getting sold legally as research chemicals that you can give to your rodents legally or whatever. But obviously people are using these, injecting these. I am using them under the oversight and advisement of my doctor. There's very few doctors that are working with peptides, but there's a growing list of very high-end, functional medicine doctors like Dr. Stickler. Dr. Neil Palvin is a friend that works with them as well. I'm working with Dr. Marcela Madera, who does some really cool work with these new type of stem cells, V cells, and she does peptides. So there are some out there. Two of my favorites, I would say, are Dihexa and cerebrolysin. Those are both going to work to enhance brain functionality more from creating new neurons by enhancing BDNF and NGF. So brain-derived neurotrophic factor, nerve growth factor, that's keeping your brain young. That's going to be like, as we age, we get smarter and dumber. We get smarter by crystallized intelligence. So, the type of thinking that, is the same task over and over and over. Basically, like it's doing that same task. We're getting more efficient at it as we age. So think of like taking the same way to work every day. Like we're getting more efficient at it. We can get like on autopilot. In that way, we're getting smarter. But as we age, we tend to be less smart in fluid or dynamic intelligence, which is the ability to learn new tasks. That's why it's important to, literally like use your opposite hand to brush your teeth or your hair with, to put your belt on the opposite way, to, put your pants or shoes on the opposite way, like, to take a different way to work, to learn a new language, to learn a new instrument, to just keep challenging your brain, go to different restaurants, like, put yourself in different groups of friends and, it's important to keep challenging yourself, or else that box will keep tightening. And in that way, you get smarter and smarter in one way, but you're losing this ability to be neuroplastic, to be resilient, like you were when you were younger. And these compounds will help with that resiliency. One supplement that's super interesting, that's actually more effective than injecting BDNF. This should blow your mind, because this is just insane. More effective than injecting the actual protein BDNF is 7,8-dihydroxyflavone at increasing BDNF levels. So this is a fairly new supplement. There's some early, like, preliminary research, super fascinating. Like, a lot of the polyphenols have been associated with BDNF, and that could be one of the ways that polyphenols and all these blue zone cultures seem to be impactful on anti-aging. Like we see, like, chlorogenic acid in coffee, catechins with cacao chocolate, EGCG with green tea, resveratrol with red wine, quercetin with onions and apples, apigenin with parsley. Like, some of these compounds are really, pterostilbene with blueberries, really cool compounds. But these polyphenols are potently anti-aging on a number of fronts. Almost all of them affect BDNF. But there's one compound really interesting to be better than injectable BDNF. So yes, these peptides are super cool. Definitely worth looking into. Most peptides are injectable because they get broken down in the digestive tract into their individual amino acid components. So you need to inject them. And some people are exploring transdermal, intranasal, other delivery pathways. But the most effective pathway for most of these peptides is going to be, injected, like IM or IV, et cetera. So those are some compounds to look at, but the supplement is very interesting as well.
And is that, can somebody buy that somewhere?
Yeah.
Where would that be available?
There's a few companies, like, on Amazon and Google that are selling it, like, kind of nootropic type sites. But it's not, like, I haven't seen, like, Thorne or, Designs for Health or Standard Process or Now or someone, like, selling a product like that yet. But it is interesting. It's pretty new.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. What do you think of the anti-aging supplements? So, like, the NMN, the NR, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, those are all going to try and boost NAD levels. NAD is one of the most important compounds when it comes to mitochondrial health, to DNA staying young, if you will, with methylation with DNA. So, like, and it's really, like, it's part of that crank in the citric acid cycle, the Krebs cycle, is this ratio of NAD to NADH. And the more you can skew that towards higher NAD, the younger and more functional your mitochondria will be. Your mitochondria are at the core of cellular energy and youth, essentially. The more mitochondrial dysfunction there is, the less cellular energy there is, and the more disease there is, because about 99% of disease is metabolic in nature. It's not genetic. It's metabolic in nature. There may be a genetic component to it, but it's largely metabolic. That's why, like, cancer is metabolic, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, coronary heart disease, these are all metabolic diseases. And they're all correlated to metabolic dysfunction, like insulin resistance and et cetera. But at the core, you can also find mitochondrial dysfunction. That's why you see insufficient cellular energy states. It's called ICE, is in the research. And in the brain, it's called brain energy gap. But it's the same idea, like, where there's not enough energy being produced and there's a shortfall. And over time, that creates glycation, inflammation, oxidation, and then leads to disease states. And so having more functional mitochondria is the idea. And so these oral supplements are supposed to boost NAD levels. But I would say the results are a little mixed. It seems like, Dr. Peter Attia, Dr. Rhonda Patrick, Dr. David Sinclair lean towards NMN. That's what I've been taking. NR, a lot of the research seems a little biased towards the product made by Chromadex. I would say it's mixed, but here's the thing. Like, I would say the most interesting data I've seen at boosting NAD is the cheapest one. It's niacin. It actually, there's a study that showed that niacin, now I'll get to why niacin might have some issues for you, but niacin boosted NAD levels 8 times in the muscle in healthy males, in adult males. So this is a pretty profound finding. Now, I think that was a 500 milligram dose twice a day. That will definitely cause paresthesis, which is that tingling flush. It feels like you have a sunburn. It's intense for 30 minutes. Some people hate it. I mean, it's not enjoyable by any means. So you have to be ready for that. And I would say, and I would also say that the non-flush versions like nicotinamide or inositol hexanicotinate, those 2 versions are non-flush, but I don't think they work as well. So I would actually go for the flush version if you can handle it. And I would titrate up over time. I would start with 100 milligrams, and you'll still get the flush at 100 milligrams. But just start taking it throughout the day. And if you need to, take it with a meal or something like that, and just start getting used to it with your body. But it does seem like niacin is a profound impactor. Now, on the other side, while as we age, we make a lot less NAD, the other problem is we catabolize it. We break it down much faster. So we have higher levels of NADAs, the enzyme that breaks it down, also called CD38. An interesting supplement to take there that's an inhibitor of CD38 is there's a polyphenol called apigenin. It's the most powerful one that I know of, and it comes from parsley. Quercetin can be good, but it has low bioavailability. So if you get an optimized, a liposomal quercetin or something, it might be good as well. So those are some compounds to look at. There is a compound that is a pharmaceutical that you can get from some of these peptide companies. That's called dasatinib. That can help with that as well. But, quercetin and apigenin, that's why they're called senolytics. They can work on that front for anti-aging. So those are some ones to look into. And then trying to think if there's any other NAD boosters or CD38 inhibitors that I know of, but those are the big ones that are potently anti-aging. Along these lines, I would say my most important anti-aging compound, because I just told you everything is metabolic in nature as far as disease state and biological versus chronological aging, is going to be metformin, berberine, dihydroberberine. Full disclosure, I have patents and work that I've done on dihydroberberine, but metformin is a drug that's been used for, I think since the 1920s. It's a glucose disposal agent. It's one of the most studied compounds out there, but it works on this AMP kinase pathway. Potently anti-aging. One of the ways that we age is advanced glycation end products. AGES literally is the acronym. Berberine is essentially the herbal equivalent of metformin. And berberine has actually been shown to be more potent than metformin. And metformin, by the way, already has a study right now with over 10,000 people just looking at anti-aging, not diabetes, anti-aging, even in healthy people. And what we see with dihydroberberine is it solves some of the problems of metformin and berberine, that it's about 5 times more bioavailable. Sometimes there's bioavailability issues with berberine. Certain people don't metabolize it well. Some people have GI distress on metformin or berberine. So dihydroberberine solves that. It's about twice as active in the plasma, meaning it lasts longer and you have to take it less frequently. And it's solving a number of these fronts where we're aging. It seems to improve CRP, hemoglobin A1C, oxidized LDL, age with DNA methylation. So like almost all the factors that we know of. And some people have thought metformin, berberine may have a negative impact on the mitochondria. But what we see when we see correct dosing across all of these people, all of these studies that we've seen, is all this anti-aging. And we think that it's actually at these doses mitochondrial hormesis, like where it's challenging the mitochondria, yes, but it's actually like taking them to the gym and making them stronger. Now, if you were to go way above the dosing recommended, maybe it would actually have a counterproductive effect. But at the doses we've seen that we're studying that are recommended in any of those compounds, it is an anti-aging effect and seems to improve mitochondrial health.
And would dihydroberberine work in a stack with other blood sugar or glucose disposal agents? Like, for instance, there's a product out there called Blood Sugar Breakthrough from Bioptimizers. I interviewed the owner, Wade. I'm sure you know Wade. And, we were talking about that product. And in that product, you have dihydroberberine, you have chromium, you have bitter melon, cinnamon, I think alpha lipoic acid. So they have a couple things going there.
Those are essentially all different, like I was saying, complementary, like each of those are kind of working on different pathways. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And the AMPK pathway is really fascinating because, I have been looking at the space and, people talk about these different anti-aging supplements and I'd be like, man, those really sound like blood sugar control agents. But the way you just stated it actually makes a lot of sense, because what you're doing is you're eliminating, you're boosting metabolism, you're eliminating advanced glycation end products. And of course, that's going to maintain the integrity of cellular health, boost the mitochondria, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly.
So where do you think liver health fits into that? Because, you were talking about niacin, and I take this B vitamin product that has some niacin. I don't know exactly how much, but when I pair that with like a phosphatidylcholine or sunflower lecithin, I get this insane flush. And so I'm wondering if it has something to do with like an interplay of like liver health or something's happening there.
What could be happening is like you're actually liposomally protecting, like that's essentially what a liposome is. Like, so you could actually be like spherically protecting some of these compounds and enhancing their delivery. Yeah. I mean, both gastrointestinally and liver detoxification. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man. And then where do you think, because I've been researching astragalus, and I know that has, I can't remember, it's like CD60 or something like that.
CA65.
CA65, yeah. And so I know there's a company out there, TA65. Yeah, they've isolated the TA65 agent, but I've seen some studies where the astragalus root actually outperformed the TA65 isolate itself.
Yeah, and that's the case with a lot of this stuff. Like, as a formulator, I can appreciate the complementary mechanisms of action that nature has. And we see that right with the cannabinoids that CBD or THC by themselves really aren't that effective. There's an entourage effect when you put them together of the flavones and the terpenes and these different other cannabinoids, that they have an entourage effect when put together. A great example of this is you just look at green tea, and some people think, oh, well, you take the caffeine out of the green tea, caffeine's the compound, but green tea also has EGCG, which is a polyphenol that can enhance blood flow. You also have theanine, which is an amino acid that has a relaxing effect, a tonic effect. And so you put the compounds together, and there's studies that show synergy with theanine and caffeine, that it kind of smooths out the effect, that enhances productivity. And then probably even more so with that EGCG, like nature has like this ultimate formulation, if you will. So, I mean, I think you see that a lot, that like when we isolate out these compounds, they're patentable, they're intellectual property that can be studied and scientifically validated. But there's certainly an argument for a holistic approach where you're using the whole plant, for sure.
Yeah. The Entourage Effect. It's so, and it's funny because like when you look up studies on TA65, and it's like, you go down the conclusion, it's like TA65 significantly enhanced this and that, but then you look down at the funding and it's funded by the company that makes the TA65,
100%.
which I know doesn't automatically rule it out, but I mean, anybody with a skeptical eye will certainly think twice. But I'm wondering what you think about the probiotic market, because it's a fast growing market. The gut, brain, the gut is such an integral part of overall holistic health, functional medicine, a lot of probiotics out there. What do you think is happening right now in that market?
Yeah, super fascinating. And I would largely say that most probiotics are not worth taking. This is going to be super controversial, but this is what I see, and I'll explain why. I think it's actually better to take prebiotics, these short chain fibers that will enhance and fuel the gut bacteria that's already in you. And I think it's also effective to take postbiotics, a new term for the short chain fatty acids like butyrate, especially butyric acid, C4, a 4-carbon short chain fatty acid. That is what these probiotics end up making in the gut. And so you've got the fuel for probiotics, and you've got the product that probiotics make, which is these short chain fibers, things like FOS, GOS, et cetera. And then you've got these short chain fatty acids, in particular butyrate, that are going to fuel gut health. Now, gut-brain axis, definitely. We see leaky gut and we see leaky brain. We see the majority of these neurotransmitters actually in the gut over the brain. So when we see gut dysfunction and we see low levels of these neurotransmitters in the gut, we see that manifested further in the brain. So when there's depression, when there's anxiety, when there's mood disorders, when there's Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, et cetera, we see a lot of that going on in the gut. There definitely is an interplay between the two. Now, probiotics, I would say there's just so much bacteria. To add bacteria into the mix and think you're really moving the needle, I just feel like it's tough. And when your body is constantly flexing around the bacteria it's choosing to keep you resilient based on the bacteria you're exposed to. This is why I love the idea of like us being out in nature, us digging in the soil, us hugging each other, us traveling, going out to restaurants. Yes, using, touching doorknobs. Yes, eating food off the floor. Yes, being around people that are sneezing and coughing, as long as you're fairly healthy at that moment. Now, if you're immunocompromised, everything changes. That's when we can get into some of the other things that people are arguing about at the moment. Some of those things I feel can make sense when you're immunocompromised. When you're healthy and resilient, you need to be taking your immune system to the gym. You're about 10x more bacteria than you are human cells. So bacteria is more you than you are you, if that makes sense. So it's important to challenge that bacteria, to let that bacteria flex and become different strains as you change your environments, as you change your moods, as you change the people that you're around, as you get out in the dirt or the seasons change or whatever. this bacteria is smart and survives. And I like for it to be dynamic. So I'd rather give it the tools like the prebiotics, and I would rather give it the fuel in the postbiotics. And yes, there is some data here and there on probiotics, but it's hard to keep them alive. It's hard to find the right strains. It's hard to get really validated data because there is so much flux and flex with these bacteria that it's not compelling enough right now. I haven't seen many compelling studies as of yet. Do I think the gut is super important? Absolutely. And there's a really good study that recently came out on fiber, a high fiber diet versus a high fermented food diet. And the fermented food diet had much better outcomes with health, with mood, with outcomes than did the fiber. So, I mean, that goes back to this idea of these short chain fatty acids. So having more like vinegar, which is the shortest chain fatty acid, acetic acid, acetate, stuff like that is helpful for the gut. So that's just where I come from on it. Hopefully no one freaks out. I'm not saying probiotics are bad, and I've recommended probiotics. There's certain products that I've taken that I've seen decent effects from, but it's just not overwhelmingly compelling enough. And this is just where I'm starting to land on the probiotic thing.
And I also think there's another layer to it, which is like the whole delivery system of the probiotic, which, it doesn't seem like a lot of companies have figured out. Exactly. I'm a big fan of like digestive bitters. I don't know if you mess with those at all or. Yeah. I actually, I made my own. It's just like so wild to like, sit there with these herbs. I'm like crushing them with my hands and like soaking them with like rum. I'm like leaving Costco with like 4 bottles of, giant things of rum. They're like, oh, someone's gonna have a good weekend. I'm like, yeah, baby, that's all about digestion. But, I think it's such an underappreciated part of this idea of like gut health that really, I think takes kind of a more advanced look at holistic health, which is like, the absorption of food in the first place. That I think has got to be number one when we're talking about like, how do we improve the gut? Like you can't just fix your life with probiotics, the bitters, the hydrochloric acid, or the betaine HCl, whatever it is. Actually helping you digest the food in the first place, I think makes all the difference once you start getting there. And then you give your gut a little bit more relief, and then maybe you can start messing with different probiotics.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you travel to some of these older cultures, like in these blue zones. Like I've spent time in Sardinia, and they literally call their like post-meal alcohol drink a digestive. And they'll be like spiced drinks that you're talking about, like there'll be like a licorice, like which is anise, or something like that. Like, and it literally helps you digest your food and feel better. Cause like a lot of these cultures, they might just eat once a day and it's a big meal with, 10 rounds of, tapas, like where you have multiple choruses, right? They might be small plates, but you have multiple choruses. And that'll help you feel better. It'll help you digest your food, and yes, give you a little bit of alcohol. But like that's it's funny that I've seen that across many older cultures, is that they have that in common. They have like these digestive, kind of little shots like that they'll have at the end of the meal.
Yeah, it's just so funny. Like we tend to overcomplicate these things sometimes, but like when you look at these more ancient cultures, it's just crazy how much they figured out before 100 years ago. And then now we're just like the ancestral health movement. We're starting to like readopt those practices. Exactly. Yeah. Well, Shawn, this has been super interesting. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us here today. I feel like we just barely scratched the surface on all the things I want to talk about. And you even answered some questions I didn't even know I had. So this has been fantastic. Cool. For anybody who wants to keep up with you, I know you have, you got a book out, you have tons of appearances you make, you got a really good social media presence. Where would you send some of the listeners and viewers to go learn more about you?
Yeah, for the book, energyformula.com, you can listen to and read the first 2 chapters there. I've recorded it myself with Audible, so it's my voice. But there's also a bunch of extras there. There's a pre-chapter on natural movement, ancestral movement, like you were just talking about. There's a recipe book. There's some Q&As. There's a fasting for energy guide. All that stuff free if you go to energyformula.com. And then ShawnWells.com, I have a great newsletter that I send out every week with tons of this cool data. I don't sell anything in it. It's just free information. And then same at my Instagram, which is just at Shawn Wells, ShawnWells. And yeah, I'd appreciate jumping in there and following me and supporting, and I'll support you. I answer all my DMs. If anyone has any questions from this show, I would love to answer them and help you out.
For sure. And I'll link all that in the show notes when we get this all posted, and definitely follow Shawn. Make your social media smarter. That's all I got to say to people. Like, get rid of all the junk, all the noise, like follow people like Shawn, because like you'll be sitting there, you'll be on the toilet, you'll be scrolling through Instagram, and you might get a little tidbit about a supplement to take, and then you buy it and you feel better. And look, it's
such a great point. A few years back, I changed up all my social media to be like that. Like, people talk about how much social media sucks. I'm like, for me, it's great. I just get all this great data and inspirational stuff, but I got rid of all the people that were talking negative, that were talking politics and religion and arguing and, whining and complaining. And I just got science and motivation on mine, and that's it. And so I feel good when I get on my social media.
Yeah. And then you have intellectual arguments instead of just like nonsense name calling.
Exactly.
There we go. Well, Shawn, thank you so much for joining me today. Listener, viewer, go follow Shawn. And for more, all these notes, for more on holistic nootropics and all the notes from the show, head on over to holisticnootropics.com. Otherwise, we'll catch you on the next episode. Peace.
Thanks for listening. For more brain-boosting info, in-depth articles, and show notes, check out holisticnootropics.com.